Hi, I'm Gordon Hanson. I'm the Peter Wertheim Professor of Urban Policy in the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. I'm going to answer a few questions about my chapter on the local labor market impacts of the energy transition, prospects and policies, which is going to be published in the Aspen Economic Strategy Group's policy volume, Economic Policy in a More Uncertain World. There are going to be three sets of industries that will be impacted by the energy transition. Most directly will be workers who refine and extract fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. There are about 750,000 workers in those sectors in the US right now. The next group are workers who help generate electricity using fossil fuels. And there are about 200,000 workers in that sector. And finally, there are workers in manufacturing that use electricity very intensively, where the location of the factories in which they work has historically been based on proximity to coal and gas-fired power plants. There are another 750,000 workers in that collection of industries, making about 1.7 million in total, the employment level of workers who are in industries that are at the front lines of exposure to the energy transition. The places that are currently specialized in fossil fuel related industries are primarily small and medium-sized towns. The bigger ones won't have more than a couple 100,000 people outside of exceptional places like Houston or Denver. That means they're highly specialized in generating income from fossil fuels and therefore really exposed to the impacts that the energy transition might bring. Most of the workers, the strong majority of workers in these sectors are ones without a college education, and they also involve a disproportionate share of men in the total payroll. In the last couple of decades, we've seen many instances of concentrated job loss. The disappearance of manufacturing jobs due to import competition from China, due to automation, the adoption of industrial robots, and so forth. Those changes hit communities that were really specialized in that set of manufacturing industries. And when those jobs disappeared, and they often disappeared in the space of 3, 4, 5, 6 years, it left an enormous hole. Rather than seeing these places be able to adjust easily by moving into a new set of industries or workers moving out to find jobs in other regions, what happened was that job loss became endemic. Workers who'd lost their jobs didn't leave, had a hard time finding work in other sectors, and the consequence was a long-run increase in joblessness and lower overall average incomes. Unemployment insurance is one of our frontline policies for dealing with job loss. What we learned during the Great Recession and then again during COVID is that increasing the generosity and the duration of those benefits does not have the anticipated effects of delaying people's entry into new employment. What it does is put money in the pockets of folks who need it after the devastating effects of factory closure or other causes of losing your place of employment. What we also learned from those episodes is that unemployment insurance works much better when we tune it to local labor market conditions. That is, when we make that generosity and the duration of those benefits greater in response to what's happening on the ground in where you live. Unless we do that in the context of the energy transition, unemployment insurance as a national policy is unlikely to be very effective in helping workers who are going to lose their jobs in particular places at particular moments in time. When workers lose their jobs because their factory closes, because a mine shuts down, there are government programs that help them. Unemployment insurance will replace a portion of their pay for a period of time, usually about 6 months, and usually at a pretty modest fraction of what they were earning before, never really more than 30 or 35% of their previous earnings. That income helps, but it isn't nearly what's needed to deal with something like what the energy transition is going to bring, and that is substantial job loss in places that are highly specialized in a narrow set of activities. One, we know that when unemployment spikes dramatically in a place, we need to make unemployment insurance of longer duration and more generous in order to help workers make a successful transition into something new. Two, when you lose a lot of jobs in your major export industry, and your major export industry might be shutting down in its entirety, communities are going to need time and help to figure out what they're going to do next. That typically takes the form of subsidized investment in worker training, giving firms access to help in finding new export markets, in finding new lines of activity, as well as other sources of access to subsidized loans. There are three general policy approaches to dealing with regionally concentrated job loss. One is to just let markets work. Markets will sort themselves out. It could take a quarter century or more for that to happen. The second is simply to rely on existing social safety net programs such as unemployment insurance. Those programs work in the short run, but they aren't really designed to help regions reorient themselves to do new things. What's needed then is a third option related to place-based policies, where we're helping places move into new lines of activity. That means workforce development. That means technical assistance to business. That means helping small firms get better, small and medium-sized firms that already exist in a place get better at what they do. Many of these policies are designed to places that have undergone substantial job loss, whatever the reason. Could be the energy transition, could be globalization, could be automation. What's special about the energy transition is how many of the places that will experience job loss are highly, highly specialized in a narrow set of activities and have been doing those jobs for a long time. That means the sort of interventions we're going to need to help workers move into new occupations and help new firms come into existence to find new markets and new industries in which to operate might take more determined investment and more determined efforts than have been applied in other instances of localized job loss. When we look at local labor markets in the US, regional economies are dealing with major changes in the industries in which they operate all the time. You might have a good run, you might have a bad run, firms adjust, workers adjust. The US economy is a dynamic place. When we think about the energy transition, what we're imagining is a much bigger sort of change, a shock that leads to the wholesale disappearance of an entire industry from a sector. If that disappearance happens over 20, 25 years, and the adjustment is slow, it's easy to accommodate. A lot of folks say, well, the energy transition is going to take decades for it to play itself out, so we don't need to do anything special to help places that are likely to see job loss as a result of the shift away from fossil fuels. However, when we look at instances of adjustment, say, to the loss of jobs in coal mining and the parts of the energy transition that have already been initiated, that transition is rarely slow. Once an industry begins to decline, that decline can develop a logic on its own as investors realize there's just not a future of producing this particular product in this particular industry in this particular place. What that means is that as jobs in fossil fuel related industries begin to disappear, and that might take a while, they're likely to do so at a surprisingly rapid clip. We therefore need to be prepared to deal with regionally concentrated job loss that happens in a shorter time span than we might expect it to.